So good morning, dear colleagues, and welcome to this second plenary moment of the conference. Over the last decade, there is a growing belief that innovation is an urban thing. Today, about half of the world population lives in cities. Over the next, in 10 years, the estimation is that that might be 2/3 of the world population that lives in cities. And the local level is confronted with a lot of global challenges, challenges that are beyond their grasp, that are beyond their control, ecological challenges, mobility, maybe closer to what brings us together here in this conference, the mobility of people, of refugees or asylum seekers that move most to the cities, diversity, some would say super diversity. In this city in Ghent, about, if I'm correct, and you have to correct me if my figures are wrong, about 1/3 of the children who are born today in Ghent are multilingual. In Brussels, that's half of the children. In Brussels, about 120 languages are spoken, and then Brussels is a village compared to London. So this is what we will be talking about, how the local can respond to the global, how, because these global challenges like migration, like inequality, etc., they are beyond the grasp of the local authorities, but it is very much and very often the case that it is on the local level that innovative practices are built, that innovative policies are invented, and that the distance between policy and practice is so close, or that, like Jan Peter said in his keynote yesterday, that this triangle of research, policy, and practice can be developed. So this is what we will be talking about, and we have an excellent panel to do so. I present from left to right. Elke Decruynaere, she's the Alderman of the City of Ghent, and we heard yesterday from Lieve de Bosser what's happening in this city. That's quite a lot, and Elke Decruynaere is politically responsible for early childhood education and for education that, as we have learned from Lieve, is integrated on the local policy level here. And we have a second Alderman who is sitting in the middle, so I'm not going from left to right. In the middle is Mrs. Roos van Gelderen. She's Alderman in the city of Leiden, and she came directly from the Leiden festivities, I heard, to join our panel. And she's responsible for the fields of youth, care, and welfare. And then in between them is Chris Cuthbert, and Chris Cuthbert is Director of Development for the Big Lottery Fund, and that means that he is responsible for investing quite large, believe me, very large sums of money in 5 areas in England. So his work is coordinating different local projects and local dynamics. And then we have on this side of the table 2 people who have a more global view, with many years of international experience. We have Joan Lombardi, working as a senior expert for the Bernard Van Leer Foundation, and she has quite many years of international experience. And so has Deepa Grover, who is a regional advisor at UNICEF's regional office and has experience of working in 22 different countries. So that's quite an experienced panel, so I think we will have a very interesting debate. We will start with two rounds of ideas, 2 rounds of comments from our experts. A first round on this issue of how global changes and global challenges affect the local policies and how that poses new emerging problems. And the second round on how the local can respond to that with innovative practices and with integration of services, which is, I think, quite an important international trend, this integration of services. And then we will have a little break. Well, not a real break, but then it's up to you. So during the first 2 rounds, you can ask questions and put comments on the social media, on the social wall. And somebody, I don't know who, Michaela, will you do that? Summarize some of the main topics that come out of your comments during these first 2 rounds, and we will present them back to the panel. So that is how you can participate in this debate. And then we will end with some reflections about the more global level. So I have spoken more than enough, and I will give the floor to the panel and ask in the first round each and every one of them what they consider as most important and most challenging changes that affect our societies and that especially affect young children and their families in these urban environments, in these cities, and how that challenges their policies. So I will start with Ms. Decruynaere.
Thank you, and welcome in Ghent. It's an honor to be a guest and to have you all here in our city. When it comes to the first question, I want to give two answers. First of all, we in the City of Ghent, as already mentioned, we live together with a lot of people with a different background, very close to each other, but we live very well together. And I truly believe that this is because we invest a lot as a local government. We invest a lot of money and energy to be very close to our citizens. We invest in prevention and also in social inclusion in every aspect of life. And our childcare and education system are very good examples of this approach. For example, the way we assign the open places in our childcare, the way we invest in our pedagogical support, and the way we make sure parents and all parents feel at home and feel welcome in our city, and especially in our schools and our childcare spaces. We can do a lot. I really believe in the power of the local government and the local level. We can do a lot to act and to build towards social inclusions, but there are evolutions in the rest of the world that also affects the way we live here in our city. Too many people are left behind due to the increasing inequality. This also really is an issue in our city, and also the polarization between people. This too is a global issue, but we see the effects in our city, and it is really something that we are working on the local level. We work for different groups, but for all the people in our city. We have more and more poor families. We see a lot of migration to our city, also in Europe, a lot of people from Eastern Europe that are coming to Ghent to live here, who have a lot of little children, but we strongly believe that our childcare system and also our schools are open for everybody, for those disadvantaged families, but also for the families where the mother and the father both go working and who are struggling with the work-life balance and who need very good quality childcare. So we are working for both groups, and we are really investing a lot in bridging between the groups and between all the people who are living in Ghent. We know that early childhood education, when it is of a good quality, can really make the difference. For example, a 3-year-old from a disadvantaged environment knows an average of 300 words. A child from an environment with a lot of opportunities knows 1,200 words. And we know that a limited language ability is a very big influence on learning capacity. So this is for me a very concrete example that I use a lot when I'm going to talk about this theme, also when I'm discussing about budgets with my colleagues. I am using this example because it shows that ISSA really makes a great difference. It gives in addition to the home environment, an extra impulse and opportunities to develop. A second theme that very short, but I really also want to mention it as a global issue is the ecological theme. We have the climate change, and I know maybe a lot of people now are thinking, what the hell does this has to do with childhood and early childhood education. But in the city of Ghent, when we are planning and we are looking for locations of new primary schools or also childcare initiatives, we are really trying to make it very close to where people live. And we have the aim that there is a place for every child in his neighborhood so that they can walk to daycare centers, that parents can bike, can cycle with their children to it. And this really is a transition. My neighbor already said me that when he was here yesterday, he noticed a lot of bicycles in streets. This is really a transition that is happening right now in Ghent. There was a lot of traffic, a lot of problems with traffic, and we are working on this on different levels, but also this: where do you plan your schools, where do you plan your daycare centers, also as part of the strategy, because there are a lot of babies in traffic otherwise. When there is not an opportunity in the neighborhoods, and we take those maxicoses out of traffic, and you have less traffic. And also in the pedagogical projects, we really have attention. We are living in a city, so green spaces and creating more green spaces is really an issue that we are working on, but we also try to bring those green spaces and green materials, nature materials, into our child care. And you can take this very literally. Also, for example, the playgrounds, they used to be very gray with a lot of cement, and now they are green. And also there we really have a transition, almost a revolution, because 1 out of 2 playgrounds in the city of Ghent in 6-7 years really made this transition from a grey space to a green space. It's good for the development of the children, but it's also good for climate change, because it is good for the adaptation at the new climate and to have more grass and more green in the city. So I really strongly believe that we as a city and the local level can make a difference.
Thank you. I just have an additional question on one thing you said, Mr. Decruynaere. The increasing migration and diversity brings with it the challenge of polarization, you said. We live in a more polarized society. I think you refer also that it might be the values of solidarity and tolerance might be challenged. And then you said that early childhood education can have a bridging role. Can you say a little bit more about that?
I think that in a climate where there is a lot of polarization, that you really have to search for what do we have in common. And I strongly believe that every parent really wants the best for their children. And that fact, and that's not something that you can really discuss a lot. Everybody knows it. There's enough research. You see it, that everybody cares for his child. And so just by people coming together also in our schools, coming together in daycare, and that is not happening from itself. You really, for some groups, you really have to do a lot of efforts to get everybody to the childcare initiatives, because people really have to trust you. But bringing people there together when they're very young babies and children, and just see other parents with their little children and talk about that he sleep well this night or didn't he, and also give suggestions and to each other and help each other. I think that is a very powerful thing to do.
Okay, thank you. We pass on to Ms. van Gelderen from the City of Leiden.
Thank you, and I want to say that it's very nice to be here. I arrived just in time, and we are different countries. I'm here in Belgium, but when I hear what my colleague just said, it's just the same in Holland and in Leiden. I'm an alderman in the city of Leiden. It's 140 inhabitants, 1,000 inhabitants. But it's in the surrounding of an urban region, so it's over 200,000 people who living near each other, and in Leiden very near each other. And the same questions we are trying to get the right answer also in Leiden. And there are two things. I'm not going to repeat what my colleague said, but it's so we can have a debate later on, and maybe the people in the audience. Aldermen talk a lot, but not all the aldermen. I hope to prove. But I want to add two things to what my colleague said, and that's more the question: how can we reach for our goals, and how do we do it in the practice of our city? And we are searching for the right scale, I think, to connect with parents, to connect with youth. And we are in a time that we are in the decentralization. Sorry for my English. And we are searching for a scale very close to the parents and the children in the small neighborhoods, in small communities. But it takes time to look for that. Also, because there's another development, which is how do you call it? It's the other way around. So the whole world is coming in your house, and we are searching for a connection nearby. So I think it's a complex time where we are living in, but how can we reach our goals? That is to talk with the parents, to talk with the children, to talk with the professionals who are working with the children. And I think it's in the Netherlands, at least, that the professionals and others are talking about others, not with them, and not hearing always what they want, they need, what they say they need. And I think it's a process to put a pace back and just listen to the people in the neighborhood, to the parents from that child, and just listen right, and not immediately trying to get an answer or suggesting help, some kind of help, but just listen well. And it's also where you can overcome the differences and looking for what we all have in common, and it also helps to build bridges to other people from another culture or other differences. So I think that is most important, to talk with them and not talk about them. And the other thing it's important is to use our knowledge. I think Leiden, it's a city with old university. Within the university, there's lots of knowledge about early child development, about parenting, about everything. And we try as a city to connect with that knowledge and to put that in practice. And we don't always do that, and our systems not always use that knowledge to get the right answers of our questions of today.
I would like to challenge you on the first thing you said about listening. By an example, I just moved to Ghent, so I'm now a Ghent citizen. And because of these mobility reasons that Elke Decruynaere spoke about, the traffic is challenged in some of the streets, and amongst others the one I live, and all my neighborhoods are angry. And why are they angry? Because they want the cars to be in the next street and not in theirs. So who do you listen to? How do you do that?
Well, that's another kind of listening. I think it's weighing the different belangen. I don't know interests. So it's as a city we always weigh different interests. So, but that begins with listening also. And then to explain why you choose that kind of answer or the other, and that's politics. So we are used to that. The city of Leiden has very much bicycles. So I warn you. It's a big problem. We've got thousands of bicycles in the streets. Almost bigger problem than the cars nowadays.
Okay, thank you. So we pass on to Chris Cuthbert. So you have experience in different locations. So how do you respond to this?
And none of them have lots of bicycles. We're very envious of the lifestyle here. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be able to be part of this amazing conference and also to share some of the experiences from the A Better Start programme over in England. A Better Start is a 215 million pound 10-year investment of funds from the National Lottery into 5 economically disadvantaged areas of England: Blackpool, Bradford, Lambeth, Nottingham and Southend-on-Sea. It provides evidence-based support to families from pregnancy until the child's 4th birthday, with a focus on improving early childhood development. And that really spans the full 3 domains of early language and communication, diet and nutrition, and emotional development. There are many global challenges which affect local communities and children's life chances today. Less buoyant economic growth, cuts to public spending, some of them very drastic, rising child poverty, inequality, increasing population mobility, migration and diversity. In the borough of Lambeth in London alone, our local partnerships now work with communities speaking over 130 different...
There's a video session going on upstairs, and if you don't talk in the microphone the whole time, they're missing everywhere.
Okay.
From the plenary session.
At the risk of booming.
Thank you.
So in the London Borough of Lambeth alone, there are over 130 different languages that are spoken. We have a very established, settled community in the area with Caribbean, Portuguese, Brazilian, Francophone Africans in the area, but many new arrival communities joining and really adding to the social and ethnic mix in the area. Overcrowded housing and poor quality living conditions are a major challenge for many of our families, particularly those who are undocumented and therefore often fearful of public services and lacking recourse and ability to access public funds. So family outreach, community engagement and housing-based projects are increasingly important components of our work. But today I want to focus in particular on the challenge of social inequality and how this can really stifle early childhood development in local communities. One of the key drivers behind the Better Start programme was the WHO Commission on the Social Determinants of Health. Led by Professor Sir Michael Marmot, the Commission helped us to really recognise the way in which so many outcomes that matter to us, our health, educational success, well-being, are all influenced by our experiences in early childhood. As you mentioned, the ecological approach, Marmot takes that ecological approach too, recognising that there are multiple layers of influence: our environment, our economic situation, education, our social circumstances, and all of these factors have a profound impact on how children develop. These experiences of psychosocial adversity get literally under our skin. Today, even in the world's 5th richest country, we find evidence of deep inequalities between areas. A boy born in the northern seaside town of Blackpool can on average expect to live until the age of 74, whereas a boy born in Kensington and Chelsea, one of London's wealthiest boroughs, will expect to live on average to 83. That's over 8 years difference in life expectancy. And of course, any of you who saw the horrific news about the Grenfell Tower fire earlier this year, you'll realise that even within affluent areas like Kensington and Chelsea, there are families living in high levels of adversity, isolated from the wider wealth and opportunities in their communities. But inequality is not inevitable. To tackle inequalities, Marmot's #1 recommendation is that we do much, much more to give children a better start in life. In fact, the research suggests we need to begin before birth. And that's precisely what the 5 pioneering A Better Start communities are all about. So I just briefly want to mention 5 key features of the A Better Start approach, which we think and we hope will make a decisive difference to tackling inequalities. Firstly, A Better Start is a place-based approach. Our partnerships are making a decisive shift from a past where we tried to fix individual social problems one by one, sticking plaster by sticking plaster. Instead, they're designing whole systems of support, bringing together health, education, police, voluntary, community sectors, all to work in the interests of families and children. Led by a voluntary sector organisation, it's an asset-based approach that seeks to harness all the local resources, social, civic, financial, environmental. And it's guided by a principle of progressive universalism. It recognises that the whole community has a stake in our children's future, that all families need some support during pregnancy in the early years, but that some may need additional help. Secondly, A Better Start marks a decisive shift away from crisis intervention towards an approach centred on prevention and promotion. Not only does it capitalise on the first 1,000 days as an amazing opportunity for engaging families, but it also harnesses the universal services that we have, like midwifery and health visiting, in order to identify families who may be struggling and who may benefit from additional support. That way, we aim to get support to families before problems really escalate. The approach is strengths-based. It aims to reduce the stresses that families are facing, the barriers that they're struggling with, whilst also seeking to build their capacity and capabilities in the families themselves and in the communities themselves. So, for example, in Nottingham, the local partnership has developed a home visiting service called Small Steps at Home. It's a carefully crafted programme delivered by local parents to local parents. Similarly, in Southend and Blackpool, strong community engagement is at the heart of the work we do and is critical to engaging families into evidence-based services. And finally, this is a test and learn programme. It means our partnerships have a great deal of humility in their work. No one has the magic blueprint which will tackle inequalities overnight. But we are all, as I hear from Ghent is a famous saying, stubbornly reflective. It means we're determined to really work together collaboratively and build a culture of continuous learning. And that way, we hope that we can begin to tackle even the most entrenched inequalities and give children the best possible start in life.
Thank you, Chris. I think we will come back on some of the issues you touched upon in our second round, but let's first turn to Deepa. Deepa and Joan can maybe reflect on that from their more international experience on what has been said about these challenges of the local level. Deepa?
Thank you very much. Have I got the distance right? I was told 10 centimeters.
Great.
So I am Deepa Grover, as has already been said. I work in Central and Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union countries, the Commonwealth of Independent States. So while I feel qualified to speak about early childhood development, I don't know if I feel qualified to comment on what is happening in Western Europe. But I do know that we share a lot of the same challenges. And indeed, a lot of the things that Chris has said, I have to say that we are inspired a lot by the UK and the developments in the UK, a lot of the thinking that's gone on. And we have learned a lot. We have a lot of exchange. I just want to remind us about what an exciting time this is in the world for early childhood development. As you all know, This is the first time that the Global Development Agenda actually includes early childhood development as a key target. The Global Development Agenda, which is written into the Sustainable Development Goals, of which there are 17, at least 4 are directly associated with early childhood development. Goals 2, 3, 4, and 16, which are to do with nutrition, to do with health, to do with education, and to do with inclusion, peace, and stability. Now, of course, we're all confronted by global challenges which trickle down into the smallest of municipalities, the smallest of villages, the smallest of cities. And I think what we see in our region are huge inequities, growing disparities, increased xenophobia, and marginalization of populations, of families and children. And really, our work is very much focused on supporting governments, supporting the local level to address a lot of these challenges. We believe very much in universal programs, in universal services rather than targeted programs, because we feel that programs for poor children become poor programs because they don't get the same kind of time, attention, and investment that is needed. So while we work a lot at the national level, we also learn a lot from the local level. That's really where the rubber hits the road. And that's really where we need to understand how all these global aspirations are translated into positive experiences for families and children. Within UNICEF, early childhood development is globally, again, a very, very important issue of concern. We have a major global communication and advocacy campaign. We are raising funds for early childhood development. And I would just like to perhaps focus on one of the global challenges that we talked about, which is this whole question of xenophobia, this question of instability, of exclusion. We also very much look at the potential of early childhood programs for peace building. And we have countries in the region where we have hotspots, where we are actually working with early childhood development programs not only to give children the opportunity to learn about peace and to learn about conflict mediation, to learn about how to resolve conflict in peaceful ways, but also looking at the early childhood space as a forum which can bring communities together, which bring parents together, and which has the same common goal for all parents, which is good child development and good quality services to support their children's development. And I think, personally for me, because I am a great believer in peace, I'm a pacifist by nature, I think it was George Clooney who I admire very much, who said that just the way war is waged, we have to wage peace. And peace is not the absence of war and conflict. Peace is the active pursuit of peace. And I think we are already seeing in a couple of countries, like I said, where we're working, that aligning the peace-building agenda with our early childhood development work and pursuits is really already beginning to show dividends. So maybe I'll stop there and I'll pass over the mic to you.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, wage peace. I think that's probably the message. I think you gave the message of the panel. I'm really delighted to be here. It's an honor. And a special thanks to you in Ghent for your hospitality and for setting a living example of where the world can go. And to you, Michael, for starting with local, because that is the great hope. And when you were talking about social cohesion, I think we've got a new concept of social cohesion that's emerging that gets beyond the borders that made us cohesive before. And that's why we're struggling so much, because we're moving into a new paradigm around cohesion. I also think, so the words of wisdom came from the left and the right here. And your message about listening to parents, I think, is probably the other thing that we need to take out of this session, because we think we know what parents need, and then you talk to them and the whole concept changes. And I've heard that over and over and over from people. Chris and I, just to reflect on each of the panelists, Chris and I have spent a lot of time talking on Skype, early in the morning for me, about the communities in the UK, because what I see globally is what's happening in the UK is happening in Switzerland, is happening in Germany, is happening in small communities in rural Nebraska. There is a movement afoot to address some of the issues and to, I hope, celebrate diversity, because there is a richness that comes to it. I wanted to say that first. And now what I thought I was going to say. We've got growing inequalities. There's no doubt about it. We've got about 250 million children around the world that are at risk for not meeting their developmental potential because of poverty and malnutrition. That's 43% of young children around the world. 57% are not as at risk. And so if you put those children side by side, which I think, Chris, you did in your remarks, you see the difference. Yesterday I was walking through one of the plazas, and I saw these two little girls in a stroller with their, I think, mother, and they were so happy, and they were talking, and they were interacting. And then I thought about other children I've seen along the way in rural communities, in my own country, in the pictures that we're seeing in the newspaper every day of young children affected by war. And I wonder about equality, because it's so difficult to make that up. What I see happening around the world is disruption, the Ds, disruption, displacement, discrimination, depression that comes with all of that. And I think all because of disconnections. We're not connecting to each other. And I love that you turned to Michael Marmot, because the report that came out said early childhood is the great equalizer. And I always remember that term. Deepa is so optimistic about the field, and so am I. We've got a big responsibility as the early childhood community to live up to everything that everybody's talking about, us about. And I think the only way we can do that is to reflect on our practice, as Jan talked about yesterday, and to begin to create an early childhood system that is not just a program, but is really focused on the ecological model, that children grow up in families, and our service provision is not to children, it's to a family. And bringing them into the picture, bringing their culture into the picture in our programs, and creating enabling environments for parenting. I see a lot of parenting programs emerging around the world, and I keep thinking, well, we're not trying to fill them up with information like they're empty glasses. They come with something, and we have to listen to them, and we have to provide policies that enable them to parent in a positive way, and we're not doing that. Certainly, we're not doing that where I live. And I think that this movement that Chris talked about, moving from program to place, is about making early childhood happen in the whole community. And that means integrating services, and we have a tremendous metaphor for that now in the Nurturing Care framework that recently was released in the Lancet, that says young children need safety, they need health, they need nutrition, they need responsive parenting, and they need early learning. You can't divide those things. They're indivisible. And so we have to take that framework as we move into communities, and I think that's what we were hearing in the UK. At the same time, this notion of continuity. You know, when I was very fortunate to be in the beginning of the Head Start program in the US, and we thought we were going to end poverty in 8 weeks in a summer program. That was very optimistic. But we know now that early childhood is not an inoculation. You don't give a child a shot and think that you did it. It takes that continuity from the preconception period through at least those very early grades to make a difference. So continuity and integration in a place, going beyond program, enabling families, that's the hope of early childhood, to make a difference in this very, very challenging environment that poverty and disruption brings on.
Mm-hmm. Let's continue on that. So keep the microphone, Joan. Let's continue on that issue. My feeling is that we are seeing a shift in policies and maybe even a paradigmatic shift. That we come out of a period where there was a lot of dispute. To quote Frank Vandenbroeck on a conference organized by our Minister of Welfare half a year ago, he said we come out of a period where we had discussions on what was the priority: bedtime stories parents should read for their children, or a roof over your head. We come out of that period, and now we realize that it's not either or. And that's that we need to integrate immaterial and material support. And Chris also referred to that when you mentioned all these challenges. Housing is one of them. How can a child learn with an empty stomach? Right. And so that's what you're talking about, I guess, when you say we move from a program to place, and we leave these disparate, fragmented policies to have a more holistic and more integrated view. I would be a bit reluctant to speak about the first 1,000 days, because that was the title of a program that did just the opposite, that said early childhood will save the world rather than this redistribution of wealth. Was the undertone of the report, if you remember well, so I would be a bit reluctant with that expression. So is that indeed what you think is happening in many countries, this integration of material and immaterial support, this integration of different policies? Do policymakers from different disciplines speak together, talk together? Is that what we're heading to, or is that still just a dream? How do you view that?
You know, I think it's a patchwork. It's happening in some places and not happening in others, but I think we have to continue to talk about it. We can't overpromise what we're going to deliver. And I worry a little bit about that, because we can't make a difference in the lives of children unless we're in partnership with other community services. You know, you can't make up for the fact that a child is homeless, living in a shelter, under stress with a depressed mother. You have to be doing early childhood programming in a way that recognizes that and helps the family cope with that. And that's a new way of thinking for us, I think, in the early childhood community. But I see a lot of potential. I mean, just the examples from Ghent, I think.
We'll come to them.
Yeah.
Maybe Deepa, can you say what's your experience in Central and Eastern Europe with these scattering services that become more integrated, or is that a tendency? Is that a paradigm shift?
Yes and no. Yes and no. I think these words have existed for a very long time. You know, intersectoral, cross-sectoral, multi-sectoral, trans-sectoral, collaboration, coordination, convergence. And we've heard them all along until the point that we don't hear them anymore. But now again, there is a resurgence. And we find that, you know, when we say the sectors should work together, we're speaking in the abstract. When we say policy should work together, we're speaking in the abstract. And what we are learning from our countries is that it's really what is happening on the ground that can teach us on how to bring these fragments together. So in fact, yesterday, we had some very, very good presentations from colleagues of ours, from Serbia, from Armenia, who really talked about the bottom-up approach. And they talked about individual children and how this individual child had a variety of needs and how the different service providers and agents came around this child and around this family to meet that child's need. And how satisfied not only was the parent, because the parent did not have to go from door to door to door, telling the same story again and again, and asking for a little bit of support from here and a little bit of support from there. But there was this team which understood the child in the same way and decided that this is the part of support we can provide, that is the part of support that you can provide, etc. So really learning from these very real examples on the ground, which can then feed up towards building more cohesiveness, more conversation, more convergence between policies, I think is really the way to go. We have examples from other countries where we worked on building the capacity of service providers together. So educators, pediatricians, child therapists, social workers, all understanding the science of child development in the same way, so that it's not the medical doctor looking at only the physical health of the child. So for me, multisectorality really begins in the mind of the individual. It does not mean that if I am a healthcare provider, I do not notice that there is violence in the family which is going to affect the development and the health of that child. And as a healthcare provider, I should be able to pick up the phone and speak to the social worker who covers that particular area and say, perhaps we need to talk about this child. So really, multisectorality is a state of mind, and it is also, after that, a way of bringing processes and mechanisms into alignment. And I think starting from the top sometimes can be quite complicated. And at the same time, to go back to the ecological model, we do need an enabling environment which allows for these agents to work together. We do need the policies, we do need the memorandums of understanding, we do need the local mechanisms to be supported and to be, so that people are not punished for overstepping their job description or their territory, so to speak. So I think what we really need to do, while we all subscribe to the fact that different parts of the system should work together, we like it, we appreciate it, we know it's important. Now it's really how. And there are lots and lots and lots of experiences. And I think what we really need to do, we need to document, we need to share, we need to understand. And we cannot just, reproduce the same approach in every single local situation. We need to be inspired, but then we need to find our local solutions. So I'll stop there.
Okay, that's very clear, Deepa. So we don't need to think anymore about the question if we should integrate and work together. The question is how, and we need local mechanisms. So we come to the local level. We come to you, Roos.
Yes, I agree fully, because it's exactly what we are searching for in our cities, I think. We work in Leiden with multidisciplinary teams in the neighborhood, and with social workers, with all kinds of people, but also people from the government itself. So when a family is in need of a bigger house for living, good old Maslow, I think we know for centuries, I think that is necessary to have a house, to have food on the table, and also everything else he said. But when in the neighborhood you see a family who's in need of a house, we have within the team someone who can go back to the local government and to also solve that problem. So we are trying to make wraparound care around the child, around the families, but not only health and education and parenting skills and that sort of things, but also money issues, help with debts, all that kind of things who are in the heads of the parents and who are not therefore not capable for providing the care their children need, and they want that, and they tell us that. So 10 years back, 15 years back, when we talk with a family about parenting, they say, I'm worried because I have no money and my washing machine doesn't work anymore. And 10 years ago, we tried to talk about parenting and parenting skills. Nowadays, we take care of the washing machine. So that worry is no more. So you and that's, I think, an example of bottom-up good listening and working together, and not working within all the different hokjes, zoals we call in Holland.
Thank you. That's very clear.
But it's also a struggle, because we have a lot of hokjes.
Yeah.
So it takes a few years, I think. But working together helps.
Chris, I would wonder how you respond to that, because you, of course, you come from the outside, and then you come in these communities with these hokjes, with these different departments, and you try to bring people together, I imagine, or how do you operate in that?
This is just such a fascinating discussion. It's reminding me of the story of the blind man and the elephant. I'm sure many of you will know that story. The first blind man goes up to the elephant, he feels the leg, he thinks it's a tree trunk. The second blind man feels the tail, he thinks it's a rope. And it's a bit like that with early childhood development. The paediatrician's thinking about the physical health, the housing officers thinking about the material conditions and so on. And we need to really think in the way families think. We need to think family. We need to have a much more integrated way of approaching these challenges. And we're trying to grapple with that on the Better Start programme at a number of different levels. So maybe if I can give you just a couple of examples of how that more integrated approach is affecting how we're doing the systems work. The first is about how communities come together to forge a common vision and strategy. And in the experience of the 5 cities we're working in, this was a really lengthy process. It took months and months of people really stepping back and listening to each other's story. Yes, we looked at the epidemiological data and all the needs analysis, but it was only when the senior officials, the local parents, the academics, the holy trinity of research policy and practice in the local area actually started listening to each other, that we were able to agree on the things we really wanted to achieve as communities. And that played out in different ways in each of the 5 communities, but the approach was common to them all. It was about creating space for dialogue, and really trying to prioritise, throw away our own agendas, but really prioritise the things that mattered for local children. So that common purpose, I think, is fundamental, and it takes time to develop. The second common feature, I think, is about sharing power, sharing accountability. A Better Start has created new formal partnership governance structures. So each partnership is led by a local voluntary organisation, but it brings together the local power brokers, people from local authorities, the health system, private, community and voluntary sector. But crucially, for example, in Bradford, local parents have a majority vote on that partnership board. So they have the power to veto anything that's being done in this multi-million pound. And it's a local parent who's chairing that partnership board. Sometimes that's really hard work. There are tensions between the politicians and the local community, but that struggle, we think, is worth it because it means ideas and solutions are sustainable, and we're not parachuting in things that might not be fit for the local context. We have examples of really innovative new partnerships. So again, in Bradford, our lead organisation is a local community organisation, but they're working together with a consortium of local universities, the Bradford Innovation Hub, and they've got access to wonderful expertise, but the academics are also learning from the community because they're able to co-produce and design services together. And we think they're going to be much more successful than the parenting programs we've had in the past, which might have wonderful RCT evidence behind them, but might just not fit in that local community. And I think that the final example I wanted to give was about integration of services and making sure that when we have all of these different specialist provision, that they're actually threaded together in a really meaningful way for the local community. So in Blackpool, for example, the health visitors have got together with experts in academia and with local stakeholders to really map out what does that journey from finding out you're pregnant right through to school really look like. What are all those different contacts we have with the different services? Where are some of the gaps? Where are the opportunities to be more preventative and to pick up when families may be struggling sooner? And in Blackpool, they've worked to radically transform the nature of the universal health visits. They brought in some really exciting new practice around behavioural activation to support families who are struggling with depression and anxiety. And they're shifting from a very medical model of health visiting to one that's much more psychosocial in its nature. And they're also delivering a new programme called Baby Steps, a preparation for parenthood programme, which is co-delivered by the health visitors and local parent engagement workers. And that's potentially transformative because not only do parents get the health expertise of those health visitors, but they've got people who know their way around the community and who can help them to access a whole range of different supports in their lives. So this stuff has to happen at lots of levels. It's about formal governance, but it's also about changing ways of working and changing ways of engaging with families on the front line.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Elke, Joan already pointed at the City of Ghent as an example of inspiring practice, and from having been able to sit in some meetings with you and amongst others in the steering committee of the Huizen van het Kind, I know you're a strong advocate for integration of welfare and education and material and immaterial support. How do you respond to these challenges of, well, or maybe you could say what were decisive steps that ease the process of integrating services or overcoming the hokjes, as Roos called them, the different separated policies?
Well, I'm strongly convinced that we need to organize our services from the perspective of their user. For example, a child goes to school and it arrives there at 7:30 p.m. a.m. Until 5 p.m. in the afternoon. Now, for the parent and the child, this is what school is all about. But nothing is less true because the people who are taking care of the same child during the day are different people. From 7:30 till 8, a quarter past 8, it are not the same people, it are not teachers. The teachers just start from a quarter past 8 to 3:25 in the afternoon. And this should not be a problem when both teams work together and when they share the same vision and understanding. here in Ghent, we have a good example because the education and child care is in the same departments. And also the same politicians. So I do not have the problem that I have to deal with other politicians. It helps. But of course, that is not something that you can say that is, I don't think that is the key factor. It helps, but we have some very good examples when it comes to also the welfare and at school. We started a project, and I think that is the one you are referring at, and it's the name of the project is Children First. That says it all, I think. And it is about a social worker coming to the schools, those schools with a lot of disadvantaged children, with a lot of social issues about housing, for example. And for just until now, we were thinking that, okay, those families, they should go to the social services, but we now started with the social services coming to the school. Because there we see that we reach, and the social service reach all the children, all the families in the city, because you find them all in our schools. And this project is really working. It had a very good launch, and now we already doubled it. And so I really think that this is a new thing that we are doing, and that is very successful. But I see that I started with the example at the school, and one day at school, and all those different persons and also different teams and the teachers and the caregivers that are all caring and working with the same children, what I see is that even it's not only the problem of politicians working together, but also people at the floor working together, and about how they look at each other. And there we still have a problem. And I heard that we have to wage the peace. But I see that people who are caring for the young children, or who are taking the pre and the after-school care, they do not have the same wage, but they do not have the feeling that what they are doing matters. Matters just like the work of the teachers. And that also is an issue. And I think that is a very important task for the ISSA Conference and the theme of early childhood education. We also in Flanders, we used to think that everybody can take care for a baby, and everybody can just also at school when the teachers has done their task, everybody can look after children that they do not hurt each other. But we know from research that also those moments are very important. We know that what you do with little babies have an effect for the rest of their lives. So with this knowledge, we really should give the message that what those people after the school hours at school are doing, and what the people who are giving care to very young children are doing, that also is worth very much. And those people don't always have this feeling, and it does not help in cooperation with the teachers and with all other professionals.
Okay, thank you. We will now give the floor to the audience through the voice of Michaela.
That's a hard It's quite a hard task I've been given, and I strongly apologize if we could not answer to all the questions. But I would perhaps bring into discussion two issues that I think would be useful to continue the discussion with. One is, we talked about good examples, and people really get inspired by many of the things that have been said by our wonderful panelists. The question is, if we do have very good examples, how do we transfer those to rural areas, to suburban areas? Because in big cities there might be some very good examples, but actually the place where we really need to tackle the issue of poverty, social cohesion, and so on, is also in the rural area. This is one question, and perhaps it was also in the mind to talk about. The second one is, as we talked about the equalizer role of the early childhood, which is a frightening role, as we were saying. How do we talk about that in the context of marketization? When it's not necessarily the public sector that holds the power, but it's rather the private sector? Or how does that work together in such systems? Or in countries where early childhood education is not a priority. So how can early childhood play an equalizer role? I think these were two questions that I thought might be worth addressing.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe for the first question, if I remember well, Deepa, you touched slightly upon that, upon the issue of inequality and needs in suburban and rural areas. Maybe you can say something about that?
Okay. Michaela, I'm going to ask you to repeat that question. Yes.
No, about the rural areas and suburban.
Yes, it's like if we have good examples like Chris already presented, yes, from some cities, how do we transfer those in rural areas? You know, there was a program in Europe, they were calling twinning cities, so they were learning from each other. I wonder how we can do this twinning, you know, so that such kind of things can be transferred from urban areas to rural areas and suburban. Sometimes these are also the most disadvantaged areas are those that are in the outskirts of cities. So that was the question.
Okay. I'm sorry I asked you to repeat that, but I was so overwhelmed with this screen.
That's why I was asked to pick some of the questions.
I was momentarily distracted.
Yes.
But yes, no, that's a really important question. And yes, the focus has been a lot on talking about cities and urban areas. And I think we are very, very aware that they're not only rural areas, they're not only suburban, peri-urban areas, but they're also remote areas. Mm-hmm. And what we find particularly in our region is that given the economic situation, given the environmental situation, a lot of adults are leaving. And a lot of children now, young children particularly, are being left to the care of grandparents. And very often, we are so overwhelmed with the agendas in urban areas, more densely populated areas, that those kids tend to get forgotten. But I would say as far as reaching those kids is concerned, it's exactly the same principles, it's exactly the same values, it's exactly the same methods in terms of mobilizing the thinking of people in terms of what is it that can be done with the opportunities and resources that we have in order to reach children and families in the best way possible to support their development. And I think now also with improved technology, with greater reach of information, etc., we need to be thinking about how to capitalize. And like I said, it's not a question of replicating or transferring. You really, really do have to look for local solutions. And if we keep in mind the same principles of teaming around the child, if we keep the same principle of every child is unique and every child does not have the same story, especially the vulnerable child, then how we tailor our responses really has to be done, has to be something we do at local level. At the same time, we do know that while individual stories may be different, we have a few common scenarios, and I think that's what we need to try and address.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. we will not have, unfortunately, not have the time to have each panelist respond to each question. So I will just pick up the second one about the equalizing role of early childhood education in context of marketization. And there was a workshop yesterday that I attended with cutting-edge research from Utrecht University, showing that the larger marketized companies that offer childcare in the Netherlands are the worst when it comes to diversity and inclusion. So I would like Roos to respond to that, because you live in a country where marketization has been, well, a large part of the system since 2005. So what do you think about that?
I was opposed from the beginning, so you mustn't ask me that.
Maybe that's why I ask you.
Exactly, of the problems I feared, we see now in Holland. And there's an increasing realization, also with the preachers of market thinking, that it has its limits. You can see that local cities make very different kind of choices of how much market we want in our care system. So in Leiden, we try to balance and always look for the goal we want to achieve, and the methods which will help us to reach it. It's often a cooperation from private and public, but the public you need for the continuity. And for the people, for the children who needs care, but you can't verdienen.
Earn?
It doesn't make money. To put it bluntly.
Okay.
You can see there's a cherry picking of groups you can help, and you can show great achievements, but there's a group you don't reach, and that's very worrying.
Yeah.
I think, and it's you can see it in the Netherlands now. That part of the private, too much private. You must work together, because there are good examples of private investments, but always together with the public, I think.
Okay, we are reaching almost the end of the time that's allocated to this panel, but I think, Joan, you have 1 minute.
I just, the market, when it comes to childcare, doesn't work. And either parents have to pay too much as a co-payment, or the quality
Can you speak
suffers
closer
and
to
the
the
wages,
microphone?
the wages are not adequate, or the eligibility for the public assistance is too low. So these things work against each other. And so I think that we have to be clear that you need public sector support to make quality programs, and we can't compromise on that.
Okay.
I just wanted to add something about the rural areas, because I think we're seeing all around the world this phenomenon of children left behind, but the school in rural communities still plays a central role. And I think using the school, helping develop that vision for what we want for children, and getting the school more engaged has a lot of potential in rural areas that I think we can work with.
Okay, thank you. To wrap up this panel, and I am sure we could speak for many more hours, and I would love to, because it's becoming quite interesting. But I would now like to ask each of the panelists to take 1 minute, not more than 1 minute, just one thing. If you would speak to a higher level policymaker, higher than the level you are working on, so that could be regional, could be national, what would be the one thing you say that makes it possible for the local to do its local job, to take up these global challenges on the local level? What would be your message to the higher level policy? Who wants to start? Okay, Chris, thank you.
Okay. Oh,
Yeah.
you can definitely hear me this time. That was very loud. I would bring this is the famous lift pitch, isn't it, with the minister? I would bring Michael Marmot into the lift with me, and I would ask the minister to make early childhood development the #1 priority right across government. I would ask every government department, what can you contribute to early childhood development? And I would want there to be a whole cross-government strategy that really drives this priority right across government, but also for government to back up the rhetoric with investment, to strip away the barriers and risks of transformation to local areas, and to help them do the innovation that they're really passionate about doing, but to take away the risk that often comes with that of not meeting central targets or what have you.
Thank you. Okay.
Yes, I agree. And also, trust is a very, very important word, I think. Trust in parents, trust in the professionals, and give them the freedom to work together and give them enough money. It's an issue in Holland, but it's not the most important thing, I think, but the freedom to work together, to go over, to look over the barriers we have now between the hokjes, and give that priority. And in practice, we now introduced the sentence, do what is necessary. Mm-hmm. Not more, but not less. Do what is necessary on all the levels. And I think that must be above our heads when we go to sleep.
Okay, thank you. Joan?
All our heads.
Above our heads. Well, I would love to meet the minister. She must be wonderful. That's actually happened to me. I talk when I promote advocacy about having your elevator speech for the minister, but I was in a bakery on a Sunday morning, half asleep, and the lead for someone very high up in our treasury department, probably the highest, walked in and was looking at the bakery goods with me. And I was shocked to see him, it was a him, and I thought, okay, Miss Advocate, let's see what you do with this. And there was a child sitting right there, and I pointed to the child and said, that's the best investment you can make in the country. And I walked out. That's it. That's all I did. I hope he remembered, and I hope he reminds the leaders of my own country now that that's the best investment they could make, and that they all should model democracy and goodwill to other people.
Okay, thank you. Deepa?
Okay, I'm slightly different. Mm-hmm. If I bumped into a minister, I would not say anything. Unless I had done my homework. Who is this minister? Is it the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Education, the Minister of Health? What makes this minister tick? Are they an economist? Are they a pediatrician? Or whatever. And I think the pitch and complexity of what I would say would be very, very directly related to what makes the minister's boat float, if you like. And I mean, we know all the messages that we need to give. We know, all the things that we need to say. So I would work with my communications person, and I would work out a really smart 2-minute pitch, and I would have an infographic in my back pocket, which after my 2-minute pitch, I would say, and here's something for you to take home with you.
Okay. Elke, you have the last one.
Yeah, I think we have some quite good lobbyists here at the table, and that you never go to the bakery the same way you did before. First of all, I I would thank the minister, because the minister has written a decree that puts the right to good childcare for every child in legislation, and also put not only the economic approach but also the social and the pedagogical approach and reasons for childcare. So I would say thank you, but I'd also say that he has to sit together with his colleague responsible for education and talk about how do we have more attention for care and taking care also in our schools. And while you are sitting next to each other, you can talk about finance with your colleague and how together you can ask at the government to really have enough budget that we finally can take care for the people who give care to our young children.